Hey everyone, and welcome back. We're doing another deep dive today, and let me tell you, this one's a doozy.
Yeah, this is going to be a good one.
We're tackling a topic that everyone seems to have an opinion on, the economy. Or, more specifically, is the economy rigged?
Right, and to really dig into this, we're looking at a series of articles from Kairos Research.
And let me tell you, they make a pretty compelling case.
What I found really interesting was, they don't just hit you with all this dry economic theory. They actually start with this really interesting story
Yeah, they get right into it.
about the author
Okay.
betting on Trump's 2016 win. And the bet was based entirely on, his whole rigged economy message.
Interesting.
And get this, the author made 10 times their money back on that bet.
Wow, tenfold. So clearly that message resonated with people. But why?
That's the million-dollar question, right? And to understand it, we kind of have to go back in time a bit to that second presidential debate in 2016.
Okay, back to the debate. It's a little fuzzy. What was Trump's argument exactly about the economy being rigged?
Well, he was really hammering on the tax code,
Okay,
claiming that it's intentionally designed to give the wealthy a leg up.
okay. Yeah, I vaguely remember that.
Yeah.
But did he get into specifics?
Oh, he did. He even bragged about using loopholes himself. He was basically saying if his opponents actually wanted him to pay more in taxes, they would just change the tax code. He was implying they benefit from the system as it is.
So is that true? Was he right?
Well, let's just set aside the politics for a second. What's really important here is that his whole statement, whether you agree with it or not, it highlights this really fundamental economic concept
Okay.
about wealth distribution and how things like tax policies, they really influence who gets ahead and who doesn't.
Right.
And to illustrate this whole rig system idea, the articles use this really clever analogy. They talk about the big issue.
The big issue.
It's a street newspaper.
Okay. I think I've seen people selling those.
So imagine you're selling the big issue in London, for example. You get what's called a pitch.
A pitch.
It's basically your spot on the street where you can sell the papers. But now think about it. Some spots are way more valuable than others.
Oh, absolutely. Location, right?
Exactly. And just like with real estate, this difference in, pitch quality, it directly affects how much the sellers make, even if they're all putting in the same effort.
That makes sense.
Now, imagine for a second that a pitch lord comes along.
A pitch lord. Okay, now I'm intrigued. Who is this pitch lord, and what are they doing with these newspaper pitches?
So this hypothetical pitch lord, right?
Okay.
They own all the best pitches,
Okay.
and they rent them out to the sellers.
Ah, I see where this is going.
And of course, they want to maximize their profit.
So they charge rent based on how much money each location could potentially bring in.
Exactly. So the seller at that prime location, they might look successful, but in reality, they end up making just enough to cover their costs and, basic living expenses.
Yeah.
Because the pitch lord is taking the lion's share of the profit as rent.
Wow, so it's like they're stuck on this treadmill, they're working hard, but the system is...
Rigged against them.
Yeah.
Taking away most of the value they generate. That, my friend, is the essence of economic rent. It's this unearned income that comes simply from owning something valuable. In this case, it's the prime location.
So it's about owning, not doing.
Okay.
Okay, I think I see where this is going.
And to really drive this point home, the articles connect this to David Ricardo's law of rent. Ricardo was this, famous economist,
Right.
and he argued that land rent, how much you can charge for it, is determined by its productivity compared to the least productive land being used.
So the more desirable the land, the higher the rent. Makes sense. But how does this all play out in the real world, beyond selling newspapers on the street? I'm ready for some real-life examples.
Well, that's where it gets really interesting. The articles walk us through a few thought experiments, still using this big issue example, to show how this all plays out in different scenarios. So let's say there's this sudden productivity boost. Maybe a new app comes out that helps the sellers process payments faster.
Okay, so faster payments. So
Yeah.
everyone makes more money, right?
Well, not necessarily. See, the articles argue that because the value is really tied to the land itself, not just how much work someone's doing, those productivity gains, they might actually mainly benefit the pitch lord.
Really? Even with a better system, the pitch lord still comes out on top. How does that work?
Okay, so think of it this way. Imagine a chart
Okay.
where the bottom axis represents the productivity of each pitch,
Right.
And the vertical axis represents the income that pitch can generate.
Got it.
Now, the least productive pitch that can still operate profitably, that's called the margin.
Okay, the margin.
Mhm.
So with higher productivity, that margin would shift. meaning that even some less desirable pitches could become profitable.
Right, exactly. But here's the catch. While that margin might move, the overall increase in potential income from all those pitches, that's mostly going to be captured by the pitch lord in the form of higher rent.
So the workers on the ground, the ones actually selling the papers, they don't really see much benefit.
They might see a small bump, but the owner of the asset, the pitch lord in this case, they're the ones who really reap the rewards. The system is still kind of rigged against those who don't own that valuable asset.
Okay, so even with positive changes like increased productivity, the system favors the owner. What about something like a cost reduction? Let's say the cost of living goes down or the price of the magazines drops. Surely that would help the sellers, right?
You'd think so, wouldn't you? But again, remember, the value is tied to that piece of land, not just the cost of doing business on it. The article suggests that wages wouldn't necessarily rise to reflect those savings.
Wait, really? Why not?
Because the pitch lord would simply adjust the rent upward to capture those potential savings. It's like squeezing a balloon. You push on one end, it bulges out the other. The fundamental dynamic of who benefits most, it stays pretty much the same.
Okay, this is starting to feel a bit depressing. Are we saying that any kind of gain, whether it's from technology or lower costs, always just flows back to the asset owner?
That's the argument these articles are making. And it gets even more interesting when they introduce a new player to the mix, an entity they call .gov.
.gov. What's that? Some new government website.
Well, not exactly. Imagine .gov as this, persuasive organization that swoops in and says, hey, we're here to provide protection, settle disputes, make sure everything runs smoothly. Sound familiar?
Wait a minute. Are we talking about the government? Is .gov like a metaphor for the government?
You got it. But they present it in a way that makes you think twice about the government's role in all of this, because those services, while important, they don't come free.
So someone has to pay for them. And based on what we've discussed so far, I'm guessing it's not going to be the pitch lord footing the bill.
Bingo. The article suggests that .gov very often ends up levying taxes on the sellers, further shrinking their share of the pie.
So even with good intentions, .gov, the government might actually be reinforcing this imbalance.
Precisely. And it's not just direct taxation either. Think about infrastructure roads, public transport. These improvements are essential, but they often disproportionately benefit property owners, driving up the value of their assets even further.
It's like a vicious cycle. The pitch lord benefits from the system. And then the government, even with the best intentions, ends up reinforcing that advantage.
And here's where the articles get really thought-provoking. They raise this crucial question: how should .gov raise revenue, if not through taxes on production and income? They strongly suggest that there is a better way, but leave it open-ended, prompting us to consider alternatives.
Okay, wow. My brain is doing backflips trying to process all this.
Yeah.
So far, we've got productivity gains, cost reductions, even government intervention, all seemingly reinforcing the advantage of the asset owner. This economic rent thing is starting to feel inescapable. What happens next in these thought experiments? So we've got this system where the pitch lord seems to hold all the cards. What else could possibly happen?
Well, it gets even wilder. The articles that introduce this idea of the pitches themselves being bought and sold, like any other property.
Oh boy, here we go.
Exactly. Now we're talking private property rights, mortgages, the whole 9 yards. The articles even bring in this Federal Reserve-like entity that's manipulating interest rates to make those mortgages easier to get.
Hold on. Is this starting to sound a lot like our actual housing market?
It's uncanny, isn't it? The articles highlight how this creates this perfect storm for speculation. People aren't even buying pitches to sell newspapers anymore. They're buying them just because they see the pitch itself as this valuable asset.
So everyone jumps in, prices go through the roof.
Yeah.
And it becomes this self-fulfilling prophecy.
Exactly. But as with any bubble, it's unsustainable. At some point, those prices and rents, they get totally detached from the underlying productivity, the actual act of selling newspapers.
Oh man, this reminds me of those stories about taxi medallions in New York City. People were mortgaging their futures on these medallions, only to have ride-sharing services come in and completely wipe out their investment.
It's a perfect example. And you know what? The articles actually bring up that very case study. These speculative bubbles, they're fueled by easy credit and this constant chase for economic rent. And they always seem to end badly.
Okay, so let's say we accept this premise, that this whole economic rent dynamic, it creates a system that's inherently unbalanced. What's the solution? Is there even one?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Well, the articles point to this historical example, the British constitutional crisis of 1909-99901, where they were grappling with very similar issues.
Okay, yeah, I think I remember learning about that in history class. Something about land taxes.
You got it. There was this proposal called the People's Budget, and it aimed to tax land values much more heavily. The idea was to try to capture some of that economic rent and use it to fund social programs.
Sounds like a good idea in theory, but it sounds like it didn't go over very well in practice.
It faced huge opposition. This whole thing actually triggered some major political and social upheavals. It really shows just how deeply ingrained these systems of wealth distribution can be.
So where does that leave us? What are we supposed to take away from all of this?
Well, the articles don't really offer any easy answers, and to be honest, neither can we. They're really just prompting us to question some of those assumptions we have about how the economy works and to consider some different perspectives.
It's like they've given us this whole new way of looking at things.
Exactly. The goal is to kind of equip you with the tools to analyze these really complex systems and then think critically about potential solutions.
Well, this deep dive has certainly given me a lot to think about. It's been mind-blowing, to say the least. We've gone from street corners to taxi medallions to the British Constitution. We've covered some serious ground today.
And this is really just the tip of the iceberg. I encourage everyone listening to really dive deep into that British constitutional crisis. See what parallels you can draw to our current economic landscape. The articles provide a new framework for understanding, but it's up to each of us to keep asking those tough questions.
Is there a way to create a system that benefits everyone, not just those who own valuable assets? That's the question we're left with, and it's something to really ponder, I think.
And that is going to do it for today's deep dive. We'll be back again soon with another one. Until then, keep those brains buzzing.